Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Story. I'm very honored to have Eric Newell here. Welcome, Eric. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, David. I'm pleased to be here.
So, Eric, before we get going here, why don't you share a little bit about your background, and then we'll go into the question we ask everyone, which is what you love about Canada.
Yeah, my background. Well, I grew up in Victoria, and I pursued an education in engineering at the University of British Columbia, and I became a chemical engineer, and I had a fellowship that took me to Britain, and Athlone Fellowship, and I did my master's in Birmingham. And then I worked a year and a half in London. My boss was knighted for his work, and then I worked on the cleanup of the River Thames. So that was kind of interesting. Out of there, I joined Imperial Oil, coming back to Canada, and I spent almost 21 years at Imperial, and then 1986, right after the crude price crashed below $10 a barrel, I was sent out on loan to Syncrude in the oil sands in Fort McMurray. And I guess up to then, I'd done a lot of travel. It was my 15th city in 20 years, and my three young kids thought we always moved. And it was a bit of a culture shock going from Toronto to Fort McMurray, which is a town at 35,000 at that point. But anyhow, love the oil sands, love Fort McMurray, raised my family there. We got the oil sands development going, and it really was, career-wise, that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, get sent to Syncrude. There I get very involved with a lot of community things, and that's part of the role of living up in a northern community, but particularly emphasis on areas like education. I was on the University of Alberta Board of Governors 1996 to 2002, and I was chair of the board for the last 4 years. And then right after I retired at the end of 2003, I became chancellor at the university from 2004 to 2008. So I have a steep connection there. We might talk about it later. And along the way, I founded Careers Next Generation. I worked at all levels. I'm the honorary chair for the Center for Family Literacy, which really gets at young kids before they're even 6 years old. A lot of work with Aboriginal groups, or Indigenous, as we now call it, and that's been a particular highlight for me. I mean, we're facing some challenges now, but I can assure you, in many areas, we're moving forward. So I'm proudly Canadian.
Yes, well, and
I
also
should point out that David, I should point out, because I'm going to get castigated if I don't, but the biggest thing for me, and quite frankly, especially as I get older, is my family. I have my wife Kathy and I, on Saturday, we're November 13th, it'll be our 50th wedding anniversary. And
wow.
And Kathy's from New Jersey. I grew up in Victoria, two different countries, opposite coasts. We have three wonderful children and 9 terrific grandchildren. And they are the most important things, and what I consider my biggest accomplishment.
Well, and I know many conversations that you and I have had about them. You are just so proud of everything that they're accomplishing too, and you're, from what I can tell, a great grandpa as well, who's working to teach your grandchildren some of the things that you learned through your life, and help them to give back to the community in big ways. So I'm sure we'll get into that in a little while here. But as we always do on the Canadian Story, I have to ask, what do you love most about this country? Like, what sets your soul on fire about being a Canadian?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I love answering, because I've been fortunate enough to travel most of the world, and lived in the United States and UK and Spain at different times. And, there's no other country in the world that I'd rather be a citizen of than Canada. In Canada, we have a very high standard of living. We have a good social net. And for me, it's the best country to raise a family in. And, by nature, I think Canadians are tolerant. I mean, we get kidded about it, but by nature, we're very tolerant, we're inclusive, we're generous, very generous, and we're humble. And we're also very community minded. Just look at the volunteerism stats. There's no other country that volunteers at the same level as Canadians do. And the other thing is, I've had the good fortune of living across this country. I grew up in Victoria, went to university in Vancouver, UBC, and I worked for the Forest Service up in Northern Canada. We've been now 35 years in Alberta, 17 and a half of those in Fort McMurray, which I love. And Kathy and I have lived a total of 7 years in Toronto, and on 2 different occasions I lived in Sarnia. I have a child that was born in Montreal when we lived there, and of course, let's not forget the beautiful Maritimes. I lived also in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, or Halifax, whichever way you want to look at it. But you know, David, when I look across, because of that experience, our country is vast and it's just so beautiful. And every area of Canada has its own, they have their own unique character, but underlying this is that basic Canadian thing. So myself, I'm a proud Canadian and I'm fiercely Albertan.
Yeah, yes, that's and those two things sometimes can conflict, as we all know. I'm also a proud Canadian and fiercely Albertan. But you have played you've been pretty humble in the introduction, and that's just who you are, and I love that. But you played one of the biggest roles in one of the most significant events, arguably, in Alberta's history. So I want to go into that because we do call this the Canadian story.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and this is a Canadian story. This brought more wealth to Canada, arguably, than almost any other single thing that's happened.
Yeah.
And certainly that I'm aware of in Alberta history. So we won't go. I'm sure you could talk about it for 20 hours.
Yeah,
But
right,
if you could summarize kind of what happened, because I don't think people know this story. I think a lot of people
yeah.
haven't heard how this happened.
Well, first to kind of set the scene, I went to Fort McMurray in 1986, but one thing first to get into our heads is the Earth, the population on the Earth has grown at an astronomical rate, and along with it, the demand for energy. And in just 100 years, 1910 to 2010, the world's population quadrupled from 1.7 billion to 6.8 billion. And I don't care who you listen to today, by 2050, we're going to be over 9.5 billion. So we've got that. The other thing that happened, if you go back 20 years ago or so, 5/6 of the world lived in abject poverty compared to the way we live in North America, for example, in Western Europe. But that changes. Look how China and India and Brazil are coming along. The only place that hasn't really happened yet, but it will, is Africa. But with that increase in the standard of living, and that comes an even higher increase in the demand for energy. So in that context, when you look at energy demand, we need every form of energy we got, and some we probably haven't even found yet. So the oil sands, now if we turn how that fits in here, we have the 3rd largest proven reserves of oil in the world. Only Saudi Arabia and Venezuela have more. So this is a vast resource that we need to be able to tap into, in my opinion, as we move forward. So with that as the backdrop, I remember I've spent whole career with Imperial Oil at this time, and I was only loaned to Syncrude. I didn't quit Imperial at that point and join Syncrude, but I was sent out there just after oil had fallen below $10 a barrel. If you remember, the Saudis did not like to be the swing producer, and they cranked the valve open and they just flooded the markets with oil, and the price went really down. And that was a huge wake-up call. Many people, including a number of my friends, from Imperial, when I went there, said, "You're crazy, Eric. The oil sands never going to be economic." When I got there in '86 after this drop, it was a very dismal environment. The people at the plants, including Suncor, and even in the community, they really feared, did they have a future here? It was palpable, and of course, at the same time, as luck would have it, they had this very nasty strike going on at Suncor with the union and the management, and both were at fault, I think. But at any rate, it was not a very positive environment. So we had to get in there, and I came in first at the vice president level, and we had my predecessor as CEO was a gentleman named Ralph Shepard, who repeatedly, deservedly, I think, is considered the toughest manager at Imperial Oil. And I was on the opposite side to him. I'd never want to be against him again. But at any rate, Ralph was a very principled man, but he was sent out there to try to get us started on getting our cost structure and everything in shape. Otherwise, we weren't going to survive. And so a first thing was, we weren't worried about so much about the development at that point. This is now 86. By 87, I had moved on from VP of Finance admin. I was now VP running all of the operations, and for 2 years. And then in 1989, I became the CEO and president. But, during what we realized is the first thing we had to do was had to sort of head down, rear end up, and get this cost structure straight and improve the safety and reliability. Remember, we had the big coker explosion. One of my first jobs, for interesting, was I had to go spend a week over at Lloyd's of London trying to get somebody to insure us. That kind of notoriety is not very good, David.
No. One might call that infamy, right?
I did convince them that you don't look back, look forward in terms of the safety culture. And so that became a huge thrust for us initially. And it's quite a success story, but I don't want to get too hung up on that. But, when I came in as CEO, our cash operating costs are something like $20 to $30 a barrel. We had 4% inflation. And if you're in the commodity business, it's very dangerous strategy to rely on inflation to protect you. So what we knew, Tim Carter, who was my number 2 by this time and still my number 2 today, or maybe he's my number 1. But at any rate, we realized and we had to, offset all that inflation and get our costs down. We actually got them down by 1999 to $12.50 a barrel Canadian. It's unheard of, The costs today are still twice that. But, I'm not comparing today to back then, but big success. And of course, along the way, one of the huge ones was improving air safety and reliability. And Suncor was doing the same. And Imperial Oil with their Huff and Puff deep bitumen in Cold Lake was a big player with us. And so we worked hard on safety and reliability. And when I came in, our annual production was 54 million barrels. In 1997, we hit 74 million with just sustaining capital. It was all done by improving the safety, the reliability, some technological improvements to the operation. That was a mega project that we got for no capital. So I'm very proud of what our Syncrude employees did, and that put us back into the game, where we're now a competitive source. So let's get to the development side. One of the things that had happened was that the first big plant, forget Imperial Oil and the Huff and Puff, they started with pilot plants back in 1959, and they chose a different development path. But Syncrude and Suncor we were in the surface mining game, and we had to deal with big integrated projects. And so the first one was the Great Canadian Oil Sands, which is now Suncor, and that was 1967. And believe it or not, our Syncrude application was turned down twice because the world was worried about having too much oil. And finally, in his brilliance, Peter Lougheed in 1971, Premier Manning was a big supporter too. I don't want to undermine him at all. Preston will be after me if I do. but Peter Lougheed, when he came in, he finally approved our application to expand, but it was on the basis we couldn't start construction until 1973. And we were never to go above 109,000 barrels per day. Of course, today Syncrude's producing over 350,000 barrels per day. But again, it just shows you how the world changes. they were worried about that. And so the next big plant that come on was Syncrude in 1978. Then nothing happened. You know, we went from being sort of the eighth wonder of the world, and no development happened. But there was all these mega projects sitting in the back. And my wake up call there was in 1991 when the Oslo project, which doesn't stand for Oslo, Norway, but it's the other 6 lease owners. They were owners of Syncrude as well, and they had a big mega project planned, and they announced it, and they were proceeding, and it finally, just like all the other ones, it went on the shelf. So, you know, we started thinking, well, how are we going to get this development going? And it was, I know, conversations down at the Alberta Chamber of Resources office, and we came up with this idea. Well, you know, the problem is we all got this mega project mentality, both the government and the industry. I'm not picking on the government here. And they thought the projects were so risky. I mean, look at Syncrude. It had to be a big joint venture that no one company could do it. It had to be, it had to have government either grants or equity, ownership in there, or some sort of special treatment. And you actually, I went through this process when we first came, because we kept a $4 billion, in those days, $4 billion project on the go to keep engineering firms working in Alberta. So I had to follow through this process where you went in and negotiated your fiscal terms on a project by project basis, the royalties of the province and the tax regimes and that with the feds. Only part of the Canadian economy where that happened. And and that scares the heck out of the investors, because
because they don't know whether it's going to go through.
Yeah, investors are quite used to accepting risks around market, prices and all that big thing, and that's part of the game. But they don't think the fiscal terms or the regulatory rules and that should be up for negotiation. They want that. They need certainty there, because quite frankly, they don't think the government's stupid. And any upside, when you have to negotiate your terms, those federal government and provincial government people are pretty sharp, and they negotiate out any upside. So it was really hurting investor confidence. So here's the thing: no development's taken place. We're now getting our cost structure and everything under control. It's 1991, and Oslo gets canned, so it goes on the shelf. So we're down talking about, we got to create a national oil sands task force. Had no idea what we meant by that, but they used to have these the energy and mines minister, federal minister, because conservatives were at the time, it was JCAP. They always held an annual meeting of all the natural resource ministers from the provinces, and as an industry, we couldn't get in through a provincial association like Alberta Chamber of Resources. We had to go through Mining Association of Canada, which Syncrude was always a big player in that. And we liked the MAC and they liked us. So we got it on the agenda, and it's a little known fact. This was September of 1991, and it got approved. But JCAP had left the meeting, and his staff came back and said, "Watch out, Jake, here they come again, those oil guys with their hand out." Well, that was the exact opposite. We were trying to get it, so we had to get it to be a typical project where it didn't need government revenues, because governments, remember, this is right around the time that people started to take our deficit and our large debt serious. The governments weren't going to put in the big amounts of money, and certainly, as I mentioned before, the investor confidence wasn't there. We had $0 going to major oil sands projects, despite having this huge resource. So really, what the thrust of the National Oil Sands Task Force, right from the outset, was we got to get this down so that, first of all, it doesn't require government support in that, and secondly, we can attract the investors. Now, there's a whole number of other issues in here. The technology we're developing, which was helping environmental. We identified several areas, but the big one that everyone wants to talk about is the fiscal regime. And quite simply, and these were the instructions we gave to the task group working it, is we need to reduce the upfront risk to investors so that they comfortable investing, but on payback, then there's got to be a fair sharing of the revenues. Design the system that does that. It was that fundamental. Now, Jake, to his credit, Jake Epp, and I mean this, because the easiest thing for a politician is just to agree to a study and get it off his desk. And he thought we were just out for another, we had our hand out again. But I had this great help from our local MP, Jackie. He senior moment, I can't remember his last name now, Jack. But at any rate, we took it took us an elapsed time of 2 years to convince Jake Epp that no, we're not after another handout, exactly the opposite. So we created the National Oil Sands Task Force. It got created in May of 1993. It was designed by nature to be very inclusive, to be bipartisan and everything. I called it the mother of all collaboratives. We had 35 different organizations and 70 people involved. And so we developed this vision. We came up with a report in May of 1995. And we had this vision of what would be possible with the technology was come along, the new surface mining and extraction technology being developed at Syncrude with our hydro transport, and then the SAGD, steam assisted gravity drainage to complement the real deep huff and puff process by Imperial. And that was developed by AOSTRA, a government industry partnership that was initiated again by Peter Lougheed in 71. But at any rate, we had lots of components to this thing, but the vision was that we could triple production from the oil sands. It would take us 25 years, and it would probably take $20 to $25 billion. And I used to sweat when I started saying that out there, because remember, we had $0 going in, and people would look at me like I was smoking something funny. So now a lot of people think when you finish the study, that's the end. To me, that was just the beginning, and that started off, and we went into a massive cell. In the way we did the assessment, remember I said one key thing was it was bipartisan. Secondly, the makeup of the task force was very inclusive. It included not only the relevant departments of the provincial government, the federal government, all of industry, the technology developers, the industry players, the unions. One of my biggest supporters was Bob Blakely, who was head of the building trades, and we had the non-union people in there. Big input from Indigenous, because the benefits that flow to Indigenous communities are huge, as Chief Boucher will tell you. Fort McKay is totally independent of government today. You know that? Very few.
Yeah, they never would have been without this.
No. And Jim can tell that story sometime for you. But now we did try to get the environmentalists. We didn't have real activists like Greenpeace today, but they were out there. But they didn't come because I think they thought they were being co-opted. That wasn't really the intent. I would have rather them there. But the point was, we wanted to develop this in a holistic fashion. We never ever talked about, well, how is this going to affect the profitability of Imperial Oil or Shell or whatever? I mean, you may not believe this, but a lot of Canadians don't care about the profitability of Imperial and Shell. But what they do care deeply about is jobs and the revenues that would flow to government in terms of royalties and taxes that can help finance those wonderful social safety net programs that we got and we all value so highly in Canada. So that's what it did. We came out with this report, and it caught people's attention. We identified the 8 areas, the 8 key barriers, I won't go through them all, that needed to be overcome to realize this vision. And we actually said who should be on it in that. And the key one was, of course, the fiscal regime. And there, you appreciate this because you're involved in the government, but on the task group, which the key player from industry was my friend Al Heineman from Syncrude. We kidded him, he knew every restaurant in Ottawa by the time he finished. But seriously, we had representatives from the federal government from finance and NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, and same with from Alberta for the royalty side. We had the Treasury Department and energy, obviously. And one of the things you may find interesting, I think it was the first time that we forced finance and NRCan to use the same models and all that. And we had several different,
So which would it be, NRCan or finance that was more interested in the project, would you say, that was pushing it harder?
We're a natural fit with NRCan, you know. But finance, I mean, they were starting to see the benefits. One of my biggest helps on the federal government coming through was Kevin Lynch when he was Deputy Minister of Industry Canada. And between him and we engaged all the key groups like Canadian manufacturers and exporters. So their role was they actually had economists who could take all this input in from, you know, our modeling and actually show where the benefits accrue. And it was a huge thing because we found that Alberta retained about 40% of the benefits, but Ontario and Quebec were about 40, just equal. Because remember, Eastern Canada was still the manufacturing heartland of Canada, and all those plots and plans had to get built there. And once the mayor of Burlington, the mayor of Hamilton realized that, they, with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which we engaged, made it a number one issue with Finance Minister Paul Martin. You gotta support these guys. So normally we would never get any help from there. So we had good help from there. And my champion, of course, real champion on the political side was Anne McClellan. She was Minister of Natural Resources Canada and new to the field, but she did so wonderful representing us. I used to joke I was the conservative in charge of the Anne McClellan campaign.
Re-election campaign.
But, you know, so, but at any rate, we engaged people and showed that how it met all the various people's self-interest. You know, I did a lot of speaking. I spoke to anyone who listened. I don't know the number of speeches I gave, and I would go down to, you know, Ottawa and the center block and talk to anybody who come out and listen to me. And I did a lot with editorial boards. You know, one of my greatest supporters ended up being Diane Francis. I just used to like to go visit with her. She was always, you know, she's always very provocative in that. But at any rate, you know, we listen, we engage very broadly. Like I think Anne McClellan called it the most successful Ottawa campaign since the free trade one of Brian Mulroney.
Yeah,
because it was very extensive, because it's very hard, as you know, well, both levels of government, but particularly the federal government. You've got to work with the bureaucracy, and you don't start out at the top, you work your way up. And they're quite distinct silos, you know, like we had to bring several departments along all the time. So, and we had to be nonpartisan, because it's ever got viewed as this is just helping big business, we were toast. We knew that, you know, government was trying to solve its fiscal crisis. It wasn't in the game to, you know, give big handouts out to industry. So it took a lot of effort, but you know, so what happened? Well, in November, Ralph Klein, his government, they approved the generic royalty regime, which, believe it or not, is very close to exactly what it is today, despite many challenges. And I won't go into that story, how we assured it would be fair, but there was a good story there. And then at the same time, because we all had different royalty regimes, especially the big players, Imperial, Syncrude, and Suncor, we made an undertaking to the government that we would negotiate separately on our own. I still don't know what happened with Suncor and Imperial, but it took us till 2003 to negotiate away from our royalty framework to the generic, because we wanted everybody on the same playing field. The tax thing came through by Paul Martin, who was another great supporter. In the end, Paul was finance minister in the March 1996 budget. And then I think it was June of 1996, Prime Minister Chrétien, and brought Anne McClellan, and then Ralph Klein sent up Pat Black, now Pat Nelson, was our energy minister and a great champion for us. Sent him up to Fort McMurray along with 18 of us CEOs who stood up and committed to start developing $6 billion worth of projects, which was unheard of, but so and that declaration of opportunity, I don't think you'd see it, but it's right on my back wall here. I love that. we all started, and then the oil sands development took off, and of course the one lesson I've learned, and a few things, but especially in this one, was once you get the conditions right, you'll go past your most optimistic expectations. We tripled production, but it didn't take 25 years. It was done in 8 years. And now, of course, it's 6 or 7 times what it was. The 21 to 25 billion, well over 200 billion. You pointed out the front end. This is the biggest driver. It was the most capital intensive big project in North America throughout this development period. And all of our estimates on jobs and royalties and taxes were far exceeded by the actual results. And we actually used to steward to both levels of government for a few years. We should have kept that up, because a lot of people thought we got a sweetheart deal, but it produced more than we ever expected. So it was quite a story, and I think it's a great Canadian success story. And it was in the end, it was technology that got us there. We had it without the technology, come up with this new energy vision for the oil sands. We couldn't have gone into all these other areas, but.
And I think one of the things that I like most about this story, and I'd like your thoughts on, is, like you said, there's kind of 3 things about this story that really impact me. The first is you guys saw a problem and you said, let's create a solution, but it's not just an individualistic solution. It's not a solution for our company. We're not just thinking as a sole company. We're thinking, how do we create a win-win-win? How do we make this great for the province, great for the country, and great for business and the people who have the jobs here and are trying to create lives here? And like that vision resulted in untold numbers of families being able to provide for them and create wealth for future generations. It created the ability for First Nations to get off the government dime and create their own destinies, which we've had people like Ellis Ross and others on this podcast that talk about the importance of that, right? A sense of freedom and agency. And all of these things were created because you went into this saying, let's not make it about what we can get, but what we can create, what we can build. And I think we're in a time now where we're not building or creating as much, and we're seeing some pretty negative results around that. Arguably, if you're paying for power in Europe or the UK right now, or in Asia, you're seeing the lack of building, the lack of planning, the lack of creation of mutually beneficial systems. Why do you think that is? And what do you think that Canada can do or Alberta can do to help with this problem? Because it's becoming quite stark, and there's people even saying that this is the beginning of the end. But you were in a moment where people were kind of feeling that way. You talked about the people in Fort Mac. Well, where's our future going to be? You talked about all of these big projects just being put on the shelf. You come on the scene with your group and you say, no, we're going to build something. I think what people really want to hear, and maybe like succinct, as short as you want to make it or as long, but like, what is it that makes a person get a vision like that and accomplish it? A vision that's not just about, so many companies are about like the bottom line, shareholders over the next quarter. You weren't like that. You're like, no, I think if we do this, it could be big. And then it was bigger than your wildest dreams.
Yeah. Well, I think there's 2 fundamental principles that relate to our story back in the oil sands area. One is, remember I set the context of how the oil sands fit in with the whole world energy supply thing, and it started with Syncrude and Suncor, our leadership. We looked at each other, quite frankly, as competitors, but we never competed on good stuff like safety or environmental issues. And finally we got our heads together and we said, we got to look at who is our chief competition here. Is it Suncor or Syncrude? No, it's really Saudi Arabia. They're way down at that low end of the cost structure. We're way up at the end here. If we're actually going to be successful, we have got to learn how to compete against those other low cost suppliers. We're high cost and get ourselves down. So that was one thing, and then it spread beyond just Syncrude and Suncor. But the other concept, and I think this is what you were kind of driving at too, is so often we play a zero-sum game and we argue over how we're going to share the pie. Who's going to get a big piece. We said no. That's why we brought all the stakeholders together. We're not talking about how we carve up the pie. What we're talking about is how do we make the pie bigger than everybody's winner. So we don't need to argue about who's sharing what. It's got to be benefits for everybody. Everybody's got to win coming out of this. I used to get asked, how did you get everything you asked for on the fiscal regime negotiations? And my answer was, because it wasn't me asking, it was Canadians asking. We built it up, Bob Blakely had his members firing in petitions to Prime Minister's support as the Federation of Municipalities were doing this, Chamber of Commerce, the manufacturing exporters. We built an ally structure, and we got to get. I think today the challenges are different. For me, the big one is we seem to be on the path. We're on the path of people are really trying to be aggressive about dealing with climate change, and so we want to change to new energy systems, whether that be renewables like wind and solar and biofuels, or is it electrification, which includes also electric vehicles, and the lithium may be the new gasoline for Canada. And or is it hydrogen, including the hydrogen economy, including hydrogen-driven fuel cells and all that. There's a battle that Asia seems to be going more that way, and North America is going more to the electrical vehicle. But in either case, those are huge transitions, and they're in my view they're going to take at least a couple of decades. So during that period of time, we got this huge energy demand coming at us, the growing population. The demand for oil and gas is going to keep going up, even though COVID's just finishing or still in there, the fourth wave. We're pretty close to 100 million barrels per day of oil again, and we'll go past that. And there's big demands for gas. So we have to be careful. And this is where I think we need to stand back and take a more holistic attitude. Certainly, it's hard to do it on a global basis, but they should do it globally too. But certainly, we should be doing it on Canada. We got all these tremendous resources. We need to view it the right way. We could have this could be a tremendous engine of growth for us, and particularly as I sometimes joke we got the wrong objective. The objective seems to be shut down the fossil fuel industry. The objective should be to reduce the emissions, going there. Right. And if you wrap your head around that, you'll get different approaches. For example, what are we seeing today? People are really accelerating getting off fossil fuels. They're shutting down all the coal plants, cutting back here in Germany. I don't understand them. They're actually shutting down the nuclear. If you got your head on right, if you're really serious about reducing greenhouse gases, we should be expanding nuclear, not contracting. But they're doing that, and they're ahead of the game. So all of a sudden, you get a few blips, like the COVID recovery was a bit faster, or cold weather, and they're more dependent on natural gas. They have to go hat in hand to Putin, the leader of Russia, to get more gas pumped out. And they got cars lined up at the pumps. The UK, same thing. The UK ended up starting up coal plants that they'd shut down. So during this transition period, I think and of course, there's let me not lose sight of the fact that we're shutting down like coal plants and that by decree, but also the financial community is cutting off any support for fossil fuel industry. It's whether it be banks in Canada, Toronto Dominion Bank for one, I'm sure there's others, but you look at the pension funds, Caisse de dépôt, huge, gonna no fossil fuel investments after 2022. And then it's university endowment funds. Even my alma mater, UBC, won't put any in, and U of T, the biggest university we got, has decided they aren't going to do it. And then you got large industrial asset management groups like Brookfield, led by Mark Carney, our superstar bank governor, very nice man, and you and I know him from what he did for us at Ditchley. But he's also leading the charge about cutting back investment. So if we don't invest in, or we're not going to allow investment, we're setting policies that are anti-fossil fuel, the people who normally keep that conventional supply, which is 100 million barrels going north, they aren't going to invest. First of all, they can't get the debt financing they often need. But secondly, you invest for a long term, and with policies are getting set. So what's going to happen? Well, the investment in exploration production in the conventional industry is going to go way down. That means the supply of conventional oil and gas and that is going to fall while demand is increasing. So you get supply and demand out of whack. And of course, the other thing that happens is the exploration production, or the production of oil, is going to flip from the current companies and everything over to the state-owned companies that are often.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you.
Democracies, and I'm including, Aramco, Saudi Arabia's Aramco, PDVSA out of Venezuela, Gazprom out of Russia. It goes on. Those people they don't take the environment as seriously as we do. They'll cause emissions to go up. So against that backdrop, but the thing that happens is you get demand, you can get, depending on the circumstance, demand being way out of whack with supply. And we're headed for a period of very volatile and high energy prices, so this current situation in UK, Germany, Western Europe, and also in China, by the way, I'll go into that in a minute. But that's not the only one we're going to see throughout this transition. If we don't get our heads around this, like where's our, we have to have an assured supply, a marginal supply of oil. And so that's where I see the advantage, for example, for Alberta and Canada, is the oil sands. We don't have to explore for it. We know we got it. When I left Syncrude in 2003, at Syncrude alone, we had 12 billion barrels of proven reserves. It's there. Now, what I also want to point out, though, the industry has to really step up its game in terms of reducing its emissions. And that's where we have to come in. Like, we changed the whole mining and extraction thing and the surface mining thing at Syncrude, and that reduced our greenhouse gas emissions to produce a barrel of bitumen by 40%. So that's good, but we still got those upgraders. So we need to put carbon capture and storage. We got the technology. Canada's a leader in that. We've got the geology, the place to store it all. We got proven projects like Shell's Quest project, which is saving 1 million tons a year by injecting it into the formation. We got SaskPower's Boundary Dam thing. That's another 1 million. We put them on. We should be putting the industry should come together and collaborate and figure out how we can do this in an economically sound way and get our emissions down in the in situ, which is the big source of the greenhouse gases, and it's 80% of the oil sand oil. We're already working on very exciting technologies. In fact, I chaired the expert panel for the Council of Canadian Academies, so it's the creme de la creme, on the topic of the technological prospects for reducing environmental footprint from oil sands. I was the co-chair along with Scott Vaughan, who's the president and CEO of the Institute for Sustainable Development. So I got oil sands, he's got environment, and it's highly independent. But we show in there, and the report was published in May of 2015, that here are the key technologies, over the next 5 to 10 years. We didn't use real step out stuff like nuclear fusion and that. It had to be something that was near at hand. And we actually show that with success in that, we can make up to an 80% reduction in the greenhouse gases. In other words, the industry could make fossil fuels from the oil sands the cleanest, not the dirtiest, the cleanest source of fossil fuel on the planet. But it's going to take a level of cooperation we've never seen before, in collaboration, not even with AOSTR, which was a brilliant leadership initiative by Premier Lougheed, because no company could afford to do it. And out of there, the biggest thing that happened, there were several things, but the whole technology of steam assisted gravity drainage came out of there. And now I'm really encouraged by the announcement recently of the oil sands pathways to net zero, and it's got the big players, Suncor, CNRL, Cenovus, Meg Energy, Imperial Oil. They're all in there, and they're saying it's going to take a level of collaboration we've never seen before. So I think we're starting to get it. But if we did that, and then there's other technologies in there that would really help the transition to a new energy things. For example, besides the enhanced solvent extraction, which by the way reduces the amount of water you have to bring in from the local watershed, so it's got lower GHGs by a significant amount and less demand on our water resources, and we're looking at other ways of supplying the power or heat, because so far most of the power is coal-fired, and in Alberta. So you could look at wind and solar, but other ones like electromagnetic heat, the
geothermal
process,
and all that.
Enhanced solvent extraction incorporating electromagnetic heat. Only I would know that because I'm an engineer. Engineers come up with the worst acronyms, but the easy project, and it's like putting, I almost joking, but I'm so oversimplified, but it's using radio waves. And that's like putting a microwave under the ground. And again, you can, it's significant reduction in all the greenhouse gases associated with, generating that power. The one I really like, and I think it's right there or getting close and perfect size for like a 20,000 barrel per day bitumen plant, is the small modular nuclear reactors, SMRs. And nuclear, you get zero greenhouse gases from that source. So, and if we can prove it out, and part of proving it out in the oil sands means we can start putting it in all sorts of smaller communities across Canada. So again, get your head straight on this. Not only can we retain all these wonderful socioeconomic benefits that are derived from the oil sands, the jobs, the royalties, taxes, and everything, but it also can help finance the transition to the new ones. And the other huge area for us is the area of natural gas, and it links up here. That we got tremendous reserves of natural gas up in Northeast BC and throughout Alberta. And you've even heard Dow talking recently of a $10 billion petrochemical project, and another one down in Red Deer. Well, think about that natural gas, and of course it also gets involved with carbon capture and storage, just like the upgraders and that can produce this blue hydrogen. They have blue and green. I don't think it matters which it is. Hydrogen's got no emissions, and we could help build out the whole hydrogen economy. Alberta could become a hub. But also on the petrochemical side, that's a great way to diversify your economy by vertically diversifying into petrochemicals. And we've already got a very strong base. We got because we got Dow and Nova already big players in that game. And we've got cheap natural gas at great volumes. We got the carbon capture and storage technology. We're a world leader. We could share that technology with China and help them reduce their emissions too. And think about it. And then we got the geology that we can storage, and we actually have proven projects in Quest and Boundary Dam. So we got all of the infrastructure there to provide a very good marginal, secure supply of oil and petrochemicals and maybe even hydrogen going as we go through the transition period. The other huge win, and Jim Carter pointed this one out that I was maybe guilty of understating when I mentioned it, is in our emails that you and I were on, is LNG exports. We kind of lost a lot of good projects because we got caught up in all our bureaucracy and delayed approval. So the United States went from 0% of the LNG export market to 20%. They just took it away from Canada. But we do have our one project, and phase one is 6 million tons per year. And if we fill it out through all the phases that are possible, we could get to 18 megatons a year just from that one project. But if you look at what's going on in the world, even through the period 2026 to 2030, the demand for LNG is expected to rise from the current 400 million tons per year to 800 million tons per year. And people who know the game better than I do think that Canada could aspire to achieving about 100 million tons of that. And that would have huge economic benefits, but globally, it could have a huge impact on reducing emissions, because just think about it. We'd be exporting that to China and India, and they could back down the coal-fired power, replace it with LNG. So maybe our greenhouse gas in Canada might go up somewhat, but the amount they would go down in China and India, and that globally, again, think about growing the pie bigger. Stop looking at our narrow little
stop being so myopic, right?
So there are a lot of analogies. So the challenge is huge. It's multifactorial. Let's say I come back to the oil sands thing. It has many stakeholders that have to be brought on side and see the benefits from their point of view. Not just ours, not just Alberta, not just Canada, but so we can get behind this sort of vision for how we're going to go through a transition to a new energy system, whatever that may be, over the next 20 years, because that's what it's going to take, maybe longer, and do it in a way that's, we can help finance it, and that it's a smoother transition, and we don't expose the world to all these energy crises, which we may do if we keep on this path of just accelerating the shutdown of fossil fuels and not recognizing what's involved to go through this transition. In other words, all the infrastructure for, say, electrification, electric vehicles and that, all the mines that have to be open for lithium, for battery grade nickel, for cobalt, for the rare earth metals, which China controls about 80% of that market. Do we want to have our energy system dependent on China? I don't think so. So there's going to be a huge boom, and that could also be part of the Canadian story. Is not only what do we do in Alberta, but what do we do in look at Saskatchewan. If we get into nuclear, they got the best uranium supply in the world. They got all sorts of expertise. Cameco, wonderful company, and in Ontario, and that I know they got great natural resources and mines, and like nickel and cobalt and lithium. Like I was joking, lithium could be the new gasoline for Canada. So let's get our head around that we're not talking about a little, we'll take this little chunk over here. We should be looking at this in Canada in a holistic sense, and also relating it to the globe. Like, in other words, our objective should not be to shut down fossil fuels industry. It should be to reduce emissions. And they're not just one and the same. They may end up ultimately closing down fossil fuels, but we use hydrocarbon for so many different things. So I think only 27% of it goes to transportation. Just about everything we do, clothes we wear, everything has hydrocarbon in it. So we're going to have to figure out how to repurpose the whole hydrocarbon molecule. And of course, petrochemicals is a very classic example.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I'm getting a little carried away here, but
I love it.
I do think it's an exciting story if we get our head around it the right way. And it means everybody's stepping up, though. It's not just the government can't, or the industry can't say, well, government needs to do this, government needs to do that. The industry's got to step up. They got to make sure their targets are in sync with others. They got to collaborate on a level we've never seen before. It's industry, government, and academia. The three of them need to be collaborating. We need to go to an AOSTRA plus model. and I'm hoping that oil sands pathway to net zero is gonna lead that, or lead the way.
Well, I like the analogy that you brought up, right? It's like, the great thing is that you've shown that it can be done, right? That like, when people say, oh, like, how did you do it? Like, your answer is, we built allies, we built a network. We had, like, you have the guy who knew every restaurant in Ottawa. You had the First Nations on board. You had you talking to whoever would listen. And it was, a vision was created. And then it wasn't just, okay, now who's going to do this? It was, we're going to do this. You became men of action to achieve something that brought, untold prosperity to millions of people. And now you're saying, and I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what you're saying is, we could do this again. Why wouldn't we do it again? In fact, we should do it again.
Yeah.
And we can do it. And what it's going to take is a lot more than just a government passing a law or industry putting forward some plan. We have to work together to achieve these next outcomes. And I really liked what you had to say about the goal should be to get emissions down. I don't know where we lose sight of that, but so often we see with these environmentalists, they, like you said, they're more interested in destroying things than they are in building things. Exactly. I think we need to get away from that mentality and say, let's build something.
Yeah.
That's what humans do. We build things. And why are we just trying to say, no, this is bad, and not taking into consideration the fact that problems aren't simple, they're complex, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing I learned from your story the most is the solution to the oil sands development wasn't a silver bullet or one little thing that needed to be fixed or a tweak. It was an understanding that you live in a complex ecosystem, and that ecosystem of regulation and business interests and people's interests, that needs to be navigated as a complex system. And until you accept that, similarly, these environmentalists are not accepting that we live in a complex system. Right? That we don't have the electrical infrastructure. We don't have an answer to the what are we going to replace hydrocarbons with? We don't have an answer to any of these problems, and we need money to come up with answers to those problems. The government can't fund the answers to those problems. So no, I'm really thank you so much for the wisdom you shared. I think that for the people who listen, there's a lot of information here. So please take the time to really dig down into what Eric's been saying. But I think the fundamental principle here is reality is complex. And if you want to impact reality, you have to deal with it as complexity.
Yeah, and you got to involve the key stakeholders, and you got to relate the story to their need. Now, the one who did a really excellent job is our friend Jessica Weber and her thesis at the University of Calgary, where she took this whole idea of the fiscal regime and how we did it. She came up with this idea we were public policy entrepreneurs, which I'd never heard that term, and I actually like it now.
I like it too. We need more public policy entrepreneurs.
What she did a lot of fundamental research, and even on all my talks and that. And one of the points she made is I would change the story to whoever the audience was. And you don't just tell the same story with the same facts. Like I say, believe it or not, a lot of Canadians don't care if Shell or Imperial got higher profits, but they sure like the jobs, and they want to know how it impacts them. And I used to carry in my briefcase. I knew how much money was spent by the oil sands industry the previous year in every single federal riding in this country.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the biggest mistake I almost made was we had all these millions going into Winnipeg, and I was off to see the editorial board. And unfortunately, I realized the reason that so many dollars showed up in Winnipeg is that's where the employees' income tax was being collected. So I would have looked like a real jerk going in there claiming how much we improved Winnipeg's economy. But anyhow, there's always funny stories around these things. But it is right. It's multifactorial, and and you got to involve all the stakeholders. Involve them up front. Like Jessica made some interesting observations in her thesis at the end, which caused me to think. One was that Greenpeace and that weren't that active, so we didn't get a lot of pushback from environmentalists, or we were easily to handle it. And she asked me whether or not, or she was asking the question in the thesis, whether or not we could really overcome it. My answer to that would be, yes, I think so. If we could get them on, if we could have got them onto the National Oil Sands Task Force at the beginning. Don't go to someone with the answer and tell them, and then try to engage them. I learned that in Careers the Next Generation. We were fighting against some real strong union principles, and we almost made the mistake of just dealing with non-union companies, and then we were going to go to the unions with this wonderful model. And Jim Carter and I were leading this, and I said, we got to talk to Bob Blakely, get him involved. He actually greased the skids, enabled us to go. But because we brought him in at the beginning, that's another very, very key message I'd like to get across here.
Yeah.
And it takes time and energy.
Yeah, I think that's what I take most from this. It's like, hey guys, to fix these problems, these complex problems, you're not going to be able to just fix them. Like we need to, it takes time. But I like what you said about bringing people on at the beginning, because I think this is a problem that the industry is kind of facing right now. Is it, there's this right, or this, this responsibility to consult. And so they will just put that on their list of things they need to do, instead of saying, no, it's not just consult. It's no, let's bring them in and start from the beginning, and really build it as a group and say, these are all the benefits that everyone's going to share in.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's not an easy thing. It's a big challenge, but boy, it's a huge opportunity if Canada starts looking at this the right way.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Well, we've reached our hour. I wanted to ask you about a few other things, but we might have to have you back on to talk about Ditchley and the career that you put together. But thank you so much for giving us your time. And I mean this as an Albertan and a Canadian. Thank you for having that vision that legitimately transformed millions of people's lives.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, David. I enjoyed it. And I love I love the shows telling the Canadian story, because we are very humble, almost to a fault, And, my wife's American. I always joke, about Canadians, Americans is the biggest difference is Canadians would much rather hit a single or a double than a home run. But I think we got a home run on our hands here if we do the right thing. And the other statement is I would like to leave in people's heads, particularly, well, anybody, but to me, with the oil sands story, it's just we're just starting down the story, and it's technology that got us to where we are today, and it's technology that's going to take us to where we need to go tomorrow. And and I mentioned some of those key technologies, but it even goes beyond that, because we could be the bridge into, as you look out through the transition period, the bridge into areas like nuclear fusion.
Yes.
So this is not a one-shot wonder deal. This should just be viewed as a natural, logical evolvement of our whole energy industry. There aren't villains or criminals involved here. This is the right way. One person I I related well to. He said, I wish you'd stop calling it a transition, because transition means you're going to change from something bad to something good. And he says, we're not, we're just evolving.
Right. Yeah.
If we get our heads around it right. That kind of view of the world, and is that we're just on a continuum. We share all the same common objectives. We got to get everybody agreeing to that. Is a good way to go, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it's great for Canada to hit the odd home run.
Yeah, I like that. Canada needs to hit more home runs, and we can. And I think you presented a very good case for how we have in the past. The largest industrial the largest industrial project in North America that you were working on. Let's start dreaming like that again. I would be a fan of a Canada that said, let's do 100 million LNG, 100 million megatons, right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the way we need to be dreaming. And thank you for doing that yourself and for encouraging others to do the same. Really, technology got us here, and technology is going to get us through it. I think that's a really good summary. So thank you. And thank you for all of our listeners. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at The CAD Story. We have a website up now that you can visit and a blog. And we're very excited about the future of this, and I'm very glad to have Eric join us. You have any last words, Zach, or maybe a last question that you'd like to ask?
No, I'm just trying to process the wealth of information that was. That was incredible. Thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with us.
All right, everyone. Well, this has been another episode of The Canadian Story, and let's build something beautiful in Canada.